Morning, everybody. How are we? Uh, and welcome, Scott Wilson. How you doing, mate?
Good, thanks, Stephen. How are you?
Very, very good. Got people joining us all over the world today, so we're just going to get into it now. Today we're going to Scott from Amplifir. We'll get to him with an intro in a moment, but today we're going to be talking about how Scott's been using Agentic AI to dramatically transform the agency operations. Just very quickly, for those who don't know me, I'm Stephen, CEO of Bugherd. Bugherd helps agencies through the web development process to streamline client communication. Scott's actually been a customer of ours for the last 4 years or so. And we got into a really interesting topic idea that I thought we should share with people. So, Scott, before we dive into your case study, can you give us a quick introduction on yourself and Amplifir?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephen. So I'm one of the co-founders of Amplifir. We're essentially a performance digital marketing agency. So as you say, we've been a Bugherd client for many years now. We do everything from web development, app development, social, PPC, so paid search, right through to SEO optimized copywriting. And we were founded in Australia, but essentially we now have operations in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and we manage media in over 20 countries around the world, including North America, Latin America, Europe. So essentially doing all things other than creative. So we do all the performance side and helping. And Amplify, I've got another company, Wilson AI, which is an AI consulting business. So we tend to cross across both and use AI to help the agency and vice versa.
Excellent. So certainly a topic area that you know quite a bit about. Obviously, you're used to these early starts. For those who don't know as well, we're both in Australia, so it's 6 a.m. here. I'm already on to my second coffee just to make sure that we have a good chat.
Yep.
But yeah, yes, used to the early morning. So anyway, today we're going to dive into one of case studies, which around using kind of AI to do around 1,200 pages, I believe, for one of Australia's largest brands called Reece Group. We'll walk away with some practical insights into how you can use this kind of process in your own workflow. Just quickly, the Q&A and chat are open, so feel free to drop any questions you have in as we go. We'll get to them if we can. Otherwise, we have some allotted time at the end of the session. Finally, yes, session is being recorded. We'll send a quick replay link and some helpful resources afterwards. So I'm now done talking, and now I'm going to start asking you questions, Scott, because that's what people are here for. Now, I'm going to start with the big one, which is, what is agentic AI, and how does it differ from, say, a ChatGPT that most people are using day to day?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, it's a pretty hot topic at the moment because we've had the last couple of years what you call like ChatGPT is a large language model. So they often refer to them as a foundation model. So the difference with agentic AI, the way I describe it is they can act almost autonomously. So in fact, a lot of cases, what they do is they'll have access via an API, or they might connect into your CRM system or a webhook or a REST API, and then they work as part of a workflow. So an agentic AI is I almost think of it like our teams in a workforce, like people, right? So we have people in marketing and finance, and they all have jobs to do. And in those departments, you have a process and sub-process steps. What an agentic AI or AI agents is often the other language you hear is you have these agents that are given tasks and access to tools and information to autonomously do those process steps. So that way, ultimately, and often we get confused because we use the word chatbot. An AI agent is not a chatbot, and I'll define the difference. So a chatbot is where you might use a language model, a large language model, ChatGPT, to have a conversation with a human. An AI agent can be buddied up with a chatbot so they can communicate with us.
Yep.
You can have AI agents that work in the background. They don't communicate with humans, but they're essentially doing a task within a process workflow. And so, when we think about them, AI agents ultimately handle, and they can be a vertical job. So like the one we'll talk about today with where we're using copywriting. So we have an agent, its job is to do copywriting and the whole process of copywriting. Or you can have them buddied up as a whole team of them. You might have 1, 10, 20, or 100 of these agents who can manage an entire workflow across a process. So say, for example, you might be doing finance, payroll, reconciliation, or you can have a whole bunch of agents that do that entire process flow.
Excellent. I think also, one of the terms people hear or is bandied about a bit is this kind of vibe coding idea. That really leans into that agentic. It's a term that's kind of quite common now, but where essentially you have the agent doing a lot of the work. There's still human supervision involved, obviously, because things happen, and we'll get into some of that today. But was there a specific operational kind of pain that pushed you in this direction towards the agentic solutions?
We started working in them in my own company a couple of years ago because you'd see, and I'm sure lots of your listeners are experiencing this. Companies are out there piloting, AI, and they've usually picked up, Microsoft Azure. They start to do a chat, for example, and they're trying to deploy chat within their environment. And what I'm sure a lot of people have experienced, and maybe Stephen, the best way to think about it is, if you've used ChatGPT and you put a prompt in and you get a response back, and that response is okay, but you might have to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different follow-up prompts to improve the accuracy of the system. The technical term of that is you've given the chatbot or the large language model 0 shots, so 0 chances to get the answer right. And what happens is a lot of companies are finding, as they try and deploy these language models within their environment, they get to about 60, 70, 80% accuracy, but they can't get the language model to stop hallucinating. So it keeps making up the answers, or it's just they're not confident to deploy it at a production scale. Unfortunately, with language models and the way they work, it's I guess it's in the name, generative AI. They tend to be really good at generating answers.
Yep.
And so what you found over the last couple of years is companies got excited because they're unbelievably powerful tools. But if you don't have the right frameworks around them to control those tools, they tend to make stuff up. And we've seen some, some really high-profile examples where customers could trick a chatbot into giving away a car for $1, or flights, or more nefarious purposes. And so we found Agentic AI. What you do is you break the process down, and because you're breaking it down to the sub-process stage and you're giving it really fine parameters, you limit the amount of hallucination. So you stop the chances of it going wrong. Mm-hmm. and because each agent, you're giving it really tight parameters and a subtask. And once it's finished that, it hands it to the next agent. And again, it's got really tight processes. We found that you can really drive that accuracy, and you get rid of the hallucinations that you see through a standard chatbot.
So it's about controlling the context of each one, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So I'll dive into the Reece thing, because I think you touched on the frameworks and stuff like that, and I think that's very interesting. And so, and I think it will give people some, I guess, frameworks for how to think about it as well. So, you did this big project for, as I said, one of Australia's largest brands, Reece Group. Just quickly, can you give me a summary of the project, how it came about, and what was their need specifically?
Yeah, so we manage the Reece Plumbing Group. They're in Australia and North America, so they've got some pretty big operations in the US. They're about $9 billion in turnover. They came to us as part of they were doing a master inventory transformation. So all of the way they manage their millions of products that they have. And they said, as part of this project, we want to take the opportunity to rewrite the 1,200 most important pages. So Reece Group have about 1.4 million content pages across their website. But this is the level 1, 2, 3, and 4 core pages of the website. So they said, look, we want to get them SEO optimized to make sure we've got all the right keywords, all the right content. And we said, great. They said, we need it done like any corporate. We need it done really quickly, and the project's got to be done well. And we said, okay, cool. To do that many pages, SEO optimized copywriting usually takes you, a copywriter, about 4 to 6 hours to go through, do the research and rewrite a page. So we estimated the project was going to require 12 copywriters and take us sort of 3 to 6 months to do that project. And we put the quote in. It was well over $1 million, and they came back and said, that's great. Only issue, we need it done much faster, and we haven't got that budget. So we said, okay, that's a bit of a challenge. And we were like, well, it's literally it's literally a X number of people for Y number of hours. And at the time, we were doing quite a lot of work in the Agentic AI, and the team came back and they said, "Look, we've got this problem. The client wants to try and do this, but they haven't got the budget. We need to be done faster." So we said, "Well, we actually think we could use Agentic AI to do the copywriting." So what we did is a process where essentially we built what they call a vertical Agentic AI. So you're doing it for one task.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole process, so we had our human team do the keyword research, but then the CopyBot, the AI CopyBot, what it essentially does is take that input of the human team, the keywords. It says, okay, this page, here's what the page is about. Here's the keywords we need to have included in the copy. It looks at tone of voice, style guide. It looks at the parent pages, so it has context of where is that page within the hierarchy or the information architecture of the website. It looks at competitor reference pages. So, you might be talking about tapware, for example, or a piece of particular plumbing, and it says, okay, what are the competitors write about it? It then writes a draft of that content. We have other agents that then check against the rules we've set. So the structure saying you've got to include the keywords a certain number of times. It runs plagiarism and readability checks, and it keeps rewriting the draft until we have a plagiarism-free piece of copy that matches what we've set out. And so what we did is we still used human copywriters within this process, but we used one copywriter who did the top 200 pages, which really set that sort of tone of voice and style for the site. And then once that was done, the agents essentially did the copywriting for the other 1,000 pages that sit underneath that. And now that tool, we've gone on and we use that now across our other clients. So we incorporate, and it's an important point, we still incorporate human copywriters and we have the AI agent. So we actually have them working side by side.
Yeah, great. And I think for those that don't know, when we talk about the instructions that is given to an individual agent,
Mm.
so that's really just a document. It's a piece of paper, or effectively that you say to that agent, read this. These are the rules of your engagement within this project.
Yeah, that's right. So I think it's a really good point. So imagine it this way: you've got tone of voice or a style guide that you might give to a human copywriter and say, hey, this is the style of the client. We also, within every sub-agent, so say, for example, you had 10 agents that sit within that, you're giving each of them access to different tools. So maybe the CRM system, maybe the content management. You actually also give, within there, often an agent has an autonomous mode. So an agent can actually make a decision based on the information it's given. You will do prompt engineering within that autonomous mode. So you're still giving it rules and instructions to say, for example, you're a vertical AI agent. Your job is to do SEO optimized copywriting. You work within a broader context. Here's the things you should do. Here's the things you shouldn't do.
Yep.
We want you to take into consideration these rules. Don't do that. So you put the safeguards in to make sure that, just like I'd almost think of it like you would say you had a university grad, and you're getting them to come into the workforce and you say, hey, this is the way we want things done. Here's the process. I want you to follow these rules. You're doing a very similar level of instruction to an AI agent.
And above that, you have like I guess a super agent to some degree that oversees the work of those interns.
Yeah, you can. Exactly. I mean, not every agent's workflow does, but often what you'll have is like we do in a company, a boss agent, an orchestration agent, whose job it is to then tell the other agents, right, it's your turn now, it's your turn. Bob's giving the output to Mary, and Mary's now taking that. So just like we would in a workforce, the AI agents essentially operate in the same way. Often and that's when you're starting to get more autonomous. So they might be running across a process that has multiple different steps, and then you use an orchestration agent to manage that. In a vertical, so the example that I've got with the copywriting bot, it only does one thing. so that we don't need an orchestration agent across all the sub agents,
Yep.
because we've essentially automated a workflow. So that workflow goes from A to Z, and those agents, although they have autonomy and can keep handing back to each other. So, for example, if there's plagiarism, and often a language model will regurgitate, and you're running plagiarism checkers now to go, is it L&M written? What you do is you hand it back to the drafting agent, who rewrites it and says, hey, the following things we need to remove, and then it hands it back again. You rerun the plagiarism check. So it's a difference between a vertical workflow versus a more an autonomous workflow.
Do you have a perspective, like on the copy example, do you have a perspective on the best model for that type of work?
Well, actually, it's a really good point. So we use a couple of different frameworks. One that our company's built, but also we use another one called BotPress. So there's frameworks like Google have them, AWS, BotPress. The advantage of them is you can actually apply different language models to different agents. So,
Yep.
for example, you might have an AI agent or workflow that needs to be in a chatbot and needs to communicate with you and I. We might use one of the OpenAI mini ones, which are a quick response, so that the answers are quick and the communication flows really quick. And then the next agent may have to do deep reasoning. So we want it to write a research report for the board. And so you need to do, like an analyst would do, it needs to be deep reasoning. So we'd use OpenAI's O3 Pro, for example. But we also want to include some imagery. So then we can include Gemini's latest VO and have some content included. So you can actually, the advantage, I guess, and that's the difference between deploying a chatbot, what we're doing 12, 18 months ago, where it was kind of stuck onto an O4 model, and it was only ever as good as the model that you put there. What you're finding with Agentic AI now is you can have multiple language or foundation models and multimedia. And because you can hook them up via a REST API or a webhook, you can have it integrating to different systems and language models. So you essentially get the best of the best. The other advantage is if there's a new model, because one of the questions we often get is, oh yeah, but what if then OpenAI or Google releases a better model and this is no longer relevant? In an agentic workflow, you literally just change the model. So it takes about 30 seconds to repoint it to the latest one and
Yep.
move on. It's more about the process and the workflow.
Yeah, and the process of giving the right context and can.
Correct.
That's very interesting. So, just coming back to the Reece study, I guess quickly. And you've done this very large piece of work, and so there's a few follow-on questions for me here. One of them is really about what's the raw numbers that you saw, I guess, in terms of time saved, like time to deploy. How many hours would it have taken versus doing it manually?
Look, so manually we're about 6 months. So you've got a team of copywriters and about 12 of them. We used one copywriter to do as I said, those top 200 pages. Once you've got that, to do a whole section. So in Reece, the way to think about it is they have lots of different product categories. So plumbing and tapware and bathroom. So you've got all the product categories. And the copywriting bot writes for tapware, so everything to do from level 1 to level 4 on the website. We've used a copywriter to do those first two, so more the homepage, like navigational pages, category pages, and then the copy bot does all the product pages that sit under that. Now, we probably saved 75% on the project. When we were, and not just what we saved, but as in the client cost to the client. When we wouldn't have got the job. So the client literally said, we don't have that budget. We can't go ahead. And we said, okay, well, that's kind of an issue because it's a great opportunity to rewrite the pages. So we did it for a quarter of the cost that we would have had to do it using humans. It meant we could still get the project done. And now the CopyBot, because once it's been trained and once it knows the tone of voice and style, it keeps it, that consistency of language. And this is one of the I guess the unintended and unknown benefits, because in many corporates, especially when you've got big websites, like you'd appreciate when you got this many pages, million pages, lots of different teams or business units writing the content for their section.
Yep.
So when the customer's looking at your site from the outside, the tone of voice and style is actually very different. So you have inconsistency as team members come and go. So what happened is we trained it in one tone of voice, and we ended up with a consistent tone of voice across their main pages, which meant the client's got one brand representation,
Yep.
not different copywriters, not different eras, or a page that was written 5 years ago versus one that was done yesterday. So for us, really helping the client still achieve that goal, but do it for a quarter of the cost was and the time. Once we built the tool, they run a section in like 30 minutes. It was just quite extraordinary.
Yeah. And so a couple of, there's a couple of key players in here. One is the client, but there's also your team. And so I guess two questions is, how did you handle client education or client fears potentially around AI generated content? That's question one. And the follow-up question is, within your own team, it's probably easy for people to think like, okay, we're going from 12 copywriters to one, I'm going to be replaced, or those types of things. So, how do you reassure your team that this is about like augmentation of their work, not replacement of people over time? So that, they're both.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, because I think it's an interesting one. We're seeing across lots of clients and lots of boards at the moment. AI is a pretty hot topic. Everyone's talking about it and figuring out how they use it, how they deploy it. There's a couple of things for us in this particular project. We often use freelance copywriters because, again, you're not running these style of projects all the time. So for us, it would have been scaling up with a whole bunch of freelancers. And so instead of having to do that, we had our one copywriter, and we could get on with the project. So from our team's perspective, it was all upside. The other thing is, it's giving us the ability to deliver more copy. So one of the, and as a performance agency, we provide SEO optimized copywriting. One of the challenges for clients is often the cost of it. So have a copywriter do 4 to 6 hours of work on a page, it can come at a pretty significant cost. So there's always this tension between, I want to do the SEO work, and I want to get ranked on page one of Google. Oh, geez, I've also got to spend X on doing 5, 6, 7, 8 pages of copy. So it adds to their cost. And some clients they'll do it themselves. And then you're down to, I guess, the quality question of how good the internal team are at rewriting content. Other clients, it's incurring a cost. And so what we're finding now is our team, talking to the agency side, are really happy because we're able to go to clients and say, hey, for this cost, we can include, for example, 2 pages of human copywriting and 3 pages of CopyBot. So you're getting 5 pages of content, and I'm not having to charge them incrementally the same as what I would if it was human copywriting.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, they're getting a much better value for the cost of our services. I think at the client side, it was interesting because the team that we were dealing with were very pro. They were looking for AI solutions. So Reece is doing big transformation projects at the moment, and they wanted to find ways to use AI. But they also realized when we did the original quote and the cost came back, and they said, well, we just don't have that budget. So it became a roadblock. And then when we came back with the solution, said, hey, I think we can do it within your budget, and we can use AI to deliver it. It actually solved their problem. So again, it was an unlocker of something that, how many websites, when you look across the world in Bughead, how many websites are untouched? You should be, when you thinking about SEO and ranking on Google, Google's assessing, and the bots are crawling your website, every single week, every single day in some cases. But often we leave the websites we did them 2-3 years ago, and then they've been left. Now you can start to say, well, actually, let's refresh the content. Let's make sure it's up to date. Let's make sure we've got all the right keywords included, which is, I'd argue, is even more important in a world where we're moving to generative engine optimization. So where the language models like ChatGPT, we're seeing 15% plus of some of our clients' traffic is coming from generative engines. So you're being included in that citation. If you look at those generative engines, unlike Google, who's had 25 years of history to rank and index our pages, the generative engines are crawling the content on your website. So it's actually more important now to have fresh and updated content with all the technical aspects taken care of than ever, because otherwise it's a winners take all environment. You're either included in the generative engine result or you're not.
Yeah.
There's no 10 blue links anymore. And
Yeah.
I don't think people have really landed on that. Hang on, our website is one of the most important pieces of content that we need to do, and the bots are crawling it whether we like it or not.
Yeah. There's a whole tangent I could go on with that, and I'm not going to just for the sake of time. I want to get to a couple of questions actually we've got because I think they tie in now. But from Selden, how much concern do you, or what do we have for the LLM detectors to incur like SEO penalties in the future?
It's a really good question. I think that's why we in the vertical agent structure, we made sure that we had plagiarism checking tools incorporated and readability tools, so that you're getting it. And I guess, if you look at what Google, all the advice Google have given, using them as an example, I guess the analogy I put it, it's a bit like a tradesperson. Can you cut a piece of wood with a handsaw? Yes, you can. Can you use a power saw? Yes. So I wouldn't take the output of an LLM and just publish it, right? So even in this content, we had human copywriting at the top level, setting tone of voice and style. The agent took into account the parent pages, and then they write in the context of those parent pages. We then, at the end of it, did human review. So we still looked at the pages and went, are we happy with the copy?
Yep.
And we had to tweak it a little bit. So early in the project, the first category or two, when we first ran the output, we're not quite happy with that. We then tightened up some of the parameters. They call it fine tuning. So you say, no, I want you to use this. Don't use store in this particular context, use branch. So sometimes the language and the way that you want to come across is important. And that goes into those rules or the prompting. But once you've tightened those up, it gives that consistency. So for us, it was, Reece is seeing the copy now, and when we do a human review, because the tone of voice and the style is really consistent, it's actually as good as the human copywriters, because it's been based on that human copywriting.
Interesting. A follow-up question around the how your agents differ, and I think you've kind of touched on some of it then, but how your agents kind of differ from, say, a ChatGPT agent, as they call it.
Yeah, look, I think the way I describe it is, you might, could you manually sit there and do what we're doing with the copywriting bot by using ChatGPT? Absolutely. What you'd have to do, Bud, is you might have 10 different prompts or steps that you would have to take the keywords, put the keyword research in. You'd have to have, I want you to write a header, a H1. I want you to write the meta description. I want you to do the internal linking, so figure out which pages. I want you to look at the competitor pages and analyze them. I want you to write me a draft. I want you to rewrite that draft. I'm loading documents. So each of these sub steps, are built into one solution. Each of those in a chat GPT, you would be manually prompting, manually uploading. You might do a GPT yourself that you've got the multi-steps in there, but you've still got to manually take those actions. I think OpenAI has just released this week in the pro version an agentic agent where you can give it tasks and it can go and autonomously run those things. But it's not trained on your environment. It's not trained with your rules, and it's not trained on the parameters that you want to set. So I think these tools are really helpful to drive efficiency and productivity. But if you're going to deploy them at a production level where you got to put it into a corporate process, it's a bit of a different environment than just using a language model.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. Like I've played extensively, say, with Claude, with Google's ones so much, but the there's a bit of horses for courses, but the agent's going to do whatever you tell it to do. Now, Claude is particularly good for code, data side of things. Gemini, as I said, is going to be good for, you said, vision, these types of things, but really the context and the workflow that you give to the agent is where the IP is, and that's what separates it. It's just a thing being told to do a series of steps, but it's doing those steps autonomously. So your ability to give it the right context and the right workflow is going to determine the output, not necessarily the agent itself.
Yeah, and I think that I think it's a really important point, Stephen, where what I often see and say in my company, one of the first things when we go into a project is we process map, like an as is process, like how does that workflow operate? And then we go through that process, and this might be whether we're deploying agentic AI or traditional machine learning models or algorithms. Often what happens is companies, these processes build up over many years, and we don't really stop and think about how they work together. So even, like we use bug herd and you're getting bug feedback. What happens after that process? Well, a developer picks it up and they're manually going through it and they're sorting it. You can automate, and you can take one of the REST APIs that you guys use, take those bugs and then automate that flow to classify it. So the developer goes, cool, I've got different levels of bugs that I need to address. These are the high important ones versus, a small maintenance one. And I think that process of going through and understanding your core workflow and the process first, are there any steps in there you can just remove? So it was relevant 3 years ago, but today, actually, I want to shorten that process, or we've updated our CRM system, and at the moment, that's a manual step. How do I automate it? I think that's one of the most important things to do first when you think about agentic AI. The better you have a very clear view of your workflow and that sub steps within a process, and then just really challenge yourself to say, can I automate or apply agentic AI across these processes?
Yep.
That it's going to save you probably 50 to 60% of all the manual effort that sits in companies. Like, it's the amount of wasted time and back and forth and manual steps is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and which is a great segue to my next question, because it was beyond content. Where else are AI agents, transforming your business?
So we're looking at the whole SEO process, and I guess when you look at a marketing agency, a digital agency around the world, they often run at about 200 to 250K per employee revenue. We run at about 330K already per employee, and we're challenging ourselves to achieve over 400K per employee. So we're trying to drive productivity. For us, that's, one of the projects we're doing at the moment is looking at the entire SEO process. And to your question earlier around how our team, how do our team feel about it? One of the areas you just never have enough time to do is the strategy. So keyword planning, topical structuring, clustering. It's always those jobs you go, oh, I need to sit down and do a piece of work. And we're building an agentic AI to help us do that. Our head of SEO is pretty excited. He's involved in the project, working with the data science team. We had a client we're working for the other day, and he said, I've probably got 3 days worth of work, and they're in the testing phase. And the data scientist said, give me 30 minutes and we'll have it done. And that's, we're going from 3 days of manual work to, 30 minutes of here. And okay, it's 80% right. Now you can take that and craft it to the final outcome. But as we go forward, we want to apply it into all of the things within the agency. There's lots of if the agency owners on the call, things like you might be posting YouTube for a client, and we had a client that was in many countries around the world. We'd have one team member that was literally doing ad campaign placement for a day or two every month. No value add. They're a highly skilled person, and they're just creating, publishing, all those things. So we're looking at how can we use AI agents to take all of that repetitive manual work off the team.
Yep.
Because I would much rather our team members be spending time with our clients, doing more of the higher order work, analyzing, spending more time in accounts, than how do I create an ad campaign and publish it to a platform.
Yeah,
It's that grunt work that you have to
it's
do,
the busy work. Yeah.
and often it's busy work. It's a great way to describe it.
I mean, from my own example, I would use is so I do a lot of data stuff. You're just exploring questions that you have, but often a lot of your time is just getting the data into a point where you can start asking questions of it, and it's an exploration. So as you go, you build up new questions and things. And so what's actually happened is it's taken away something that might have taken me a day, 2 days to actually, as I said, get the data into a point where I can start really answering the questions I want, has come down to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's still not right. You still have to have domain knowledge. You still have to be able to kind of direct the agent, but it's sped up that, and so it's helped me get to the answers I want, and even new answers that I would never have had time to discover. And that's really, going back to that's where the value is, not making the chart in the first place.
It's a great example. I use, I often use ChatGPT. I use all of them, to be frank. But we encourage all of our team have access to these tools, and we have corporate memberships to them also, that they can be efficient in whatever way they need to be. I often use it as a thought partner. So you might, like you say, you might do research, or you say, I want you to act as an expert analyst, go and find me this information, pull it together this way. And it just helps you sometimes think through when you're thinking about strategy for a client. And, clients never value all the grunt work that you're doing. They want the outcome.
Yeah.
You've got to go through a process to build a website. But until the website's built, they don't really care what the developer has to do. They don't care about the grunt work that we have to do to place a campaign on Google or Facebook. That's for us to solve as agency owners and teams. But using these tools to make us more efficient, I think about it as the more efficiency we can drive, the more we can spend time on strategy and that higher order stuff. Because how many times in a corporate do you see people pulling data and there's no time to actually analyze or think about that data? Like your example, I've spent all my time actually just finding the data before I actually get the chance to work on it and add insight and value. If we can have, agentic AI that prepares that for you, you might do the monthly report for a client, you've analyzed it, gives you insight, but then your team's at that leap off point where they say, right, now I'm going to put it in context for the client about the so what. Why does this matter? What are we going to do?
Yep.
What's the strategies we're going to change? What's our recommendations? That's often the stuff that, many agency teams are coming in hot to a client meeting because they've just been busting their backside to get the report ready for the client.
Yeah.
Haven't had any time to stop and think.
Uh, Is there a retraining? So actually, before I go, for our listeners, if we're going to get a Q&A quick in a couple of minutes. So if anyone has any questions, please chuck them in either the chat or the Q&A now, and we will get to those. But a couple of final questions, Scott. Is there a retraining of the client in that situation? Because they're used to kind of paying for time in a sense. Back to, okay, now we want you to, rather than downward pressure on the cost just because there's less people involved, in which case you're in the same position anyway. Pay me for the outcome here, and my optimization as a business is my margin, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's going to evolve. So I think this is facing agencies across the world right now, because Google and Meta, they've been really clear. They're deploying AI within the platforms to try and do a lot more of this work, whether that's Advantage Plus or some of the Google tools. I think what we need to get to is, and this is where Amplifir over the last few years, we've really prided ourselves on, we're an extension of our clients' business. We want to act like owners, and we want to come with strategy and outcomes for them to drive their business. So for us, a lot of the ways we set up our engagement is around what's the client trying to achieve. So revenue or profit or growth in a particular business unit. It's not about the task. If you're in, we don't do things like billable hours or time on a client. We're very much around what's the KPIs and goals, because in my experience and most of my career, I've been on the client side. I want agency partners, and this is how we've set the business up, who's driving my business. And if I'm wanting 15% growth and I want to get 20% profit growth, what we find is if you're delivering that, they don't really care about the widget or the particular project or I'm paying this per pages. I think you're going to see in the next few years a rethink of how agencies charge clients and that engagement. If you go back many, many years ago, it was always how many bodies, what team members could you put on. It was almost like the billable hour model that the old creative agencies used to use. And we've shifted from that. Now in performance, for example, we charge a percentage of the media spend, and we do that because we're on the hook for results. And if the client is not getting the results, they're not going to spend money on media.
Yep.
In SEO, we do a retainer model, and I think that retainer now is probably changing, where we're going to have to move to an outcome base.
Yep.
And not so much a unit of work base. And I think that's something for a lot of agencies in the next few years that'll be a big shift, but something that's going to be forced upon you if you don't start to think about it now.
No, mate, absolutely. I do think, yeah, that's an ongoing one, and yet to be resolved as to how that will play out. I think that downward pressure is going to be real in terms of prices. I think clients will expect that, oh, you can do it for less now because of X. So I'm interested to see, and we might come back to that in some of the Q&A. But finally, I guess, like, on a very practical sense, what, for a team that's ready to start down this journey, like, what is step one?
I think if they're not using language models or even custom GPTs within their agency, I'd say start using it now. So start getting comfortable, because you'll find even using the chat GPTs or Geminis in those structured ways is going to make you way more efficient. I think if you want to head down an agentic path, then I would say get the right framework. So find a framework you can use and then start to do them. There's lots of no-code or low-code frameworks out there for agentic AI. And then just map out your process and start using it. Start exploring internally. Apply it to an internal project first, so that you can get comfortable before you start putting it out to a client. We're a little different because we've got an AI company, so we're pretty comfortable to have data scientists do the project at a more advanced level. But there's lots of low code or no code frameworks out there that you can use, and I think that helps you get there really quickly. I think when you think about agency operations, most of your cost, the single biggest cost, is people. And I'm yet to meet an agency owner that says, I don't have enough people and there's more work for us to do and we're doing all these manual tasks. That's a great spot to really jump in and say, how do I remove all of that? Whether it's client onboarding, it's the monthly reporting, it's some of the stuff that you've got to do, and takes a huge amount of time and effort, but really question the value.
Yeah, I would concur. That starting point is one. Certainly, as I said, the real wake up point for me was something like Claude Desktop or Claude Code. And then there is a concept of a thing called MCPs, which means it's basically a way of connecting it to a data source. And so, as I said, my main thing is around data, and then allowing it, just exploring and kind of testing what the steps I could ask it to do, what I would get back, and really, it was quite enlightening as to the types of things I was able to learn very, very quickly. And so I do think that kickoff point is just start with these tools on a very, on an individual basis even, and then work out how do you do that in a, on a broader, add more agents. And we're about to do into the Q&A. So there's a question in here, I think, which kind of touches on what I was about to say. So any questions for anybody? Scott, it's been great chat. But any questions from anybody, please chuck them in the Q&A. But what I was about to ask, and it is one of these, is how do you manage AI agents across that process to make sure that nothing breaks if they're kind of working autonomously?
So there's a couple of ways you can ultimately deploy them across a process, and you have monitoring tools. So similar to we do with any other piece of software, where it goes down. You can also, and this is an interesting one, we're building at the moment in another startup. We're doing an autonomous company. So essentially a digital broker, Conquered. So we're going to launch next month. And it like a broker, it does everything from compare your product all the way through to the transaction. And one of the things when you're in a complex financial product is you need to make sure it's the regulated environment. So you need to make sure your accuracy. With AI agents, you can actually have an agent whose job it is to monitor compliance. So you can have an agent, and using the example that was asked, Stephen, is you can have an agent to monitor downtime. So when does a piece of software go down, or where's the website time out, or when do we need to do it? You actually set up an agent that watches that and monitors it, and its job is to then alert you. So traditionally we'd have different software monitoring tools. When a website goes down, you get we've got a problem here, quick jump in. Now you can actually set agentic AIs to do that, and then ideally, again, it's a little bit more advanced, take the action to try and rectify it, go to the next step.
Yeah.
So, instead of having human teams sitting up at 2 a.m. when the website's gone down, and this is a challenge when you're running global businesses. You've got to have teams on 24/7, or you can start to have AI agents do that. And I think the MCP is a really good way where you can use it like think of it like a middleware, a layer that you say, okay, I've got my agents and I want to give it access to different databases, tools, systems. You can use it to give it that and be able to take those actions.
Yeah. I had a question and I forgot it for a second. It was what's the I guess minimum. Some of the words here are fairly technical, right, in terms of people. So for someone who's non-technical, I know our marketing person Marina is on the chat here, and some of the words I guess are might be, oh, I don't know if I can get involved in that. Like, what's the kind of minimum technical understanding you need to get started into this space?
Look, I think that's why I'd say, if you use OpenAI as an example, they can do customized GPT. That's essentially giving instead of you having to separately prompt and giving it tools, you kind of, and maybe listeners have had this experience, they save a prompt. You go, look, I want to do a meta description, or I'm doing copywriting, and you fine tune that prompt yourself. You've done it 5 or 6 times. You go, that's really good. It works for me. I'm now happy with the output.
Yep.
You can take that and put it into a they call it custom GPT, where it's essentially you're saving it. Think of it that way. You're saving that repeat instruction. I would say get comfortable with that first. So use it so that when you do that task every time, that, like you said, it might be the report analysis, you save that GPT. Every time you run it, you get the same outcome. Once you've gone beyond that, you say, okay, and look, at this stage, either if you're technically comfortable, then jump into a framework and start using Agentic AI. If you're not, you might still need a data scientist to help you go through that, or a data engineer to help you deploy them within your system. When I look at deployment across these things, often we're using a data scientist and a data engineer to do the pipelines and connections, etc. And the data scientist is doing the work on the fine tuning, the prompt engineering, the connections to the different data sources, because we're manipulating data or outputs in a way that we want to get to a certain outcome.
Yeah.
But I think just getting comfortable, so you can then, even if you are, say you've got an in-house data science team or an engineering team, you can go to them and say, hey, I want to achieve this. I'm trying to do this. It might be in a corporate setting where you've got the resources. And an agency, there's lots of freelance or certainly consultancies that you can actually engage to do these types of things for you.
Excellent. So 2 final questions in here. So one follow up to the what if it breaks question, which is we have these supervisor bots, as you said, compliance. What if the compliance bot starts hallucinating?
Well, that's where in any of these, we still have human in the loop. So we still maintain, review and reporting. And I think it's an important one. I'm not just take the hands off the wheel and let the things run. You do, like any software, if we deploy and build a website, you still have user acceptance testing. You still go through and get the end user to sign it off, and like we do using your tools, where we're putting bugs in, we're getting the user to look at it, we check the links. So we use the same whenever we use an Agentic AI framework. It's not just a set and forget. You want to check the outcome. I think of it this way: as you take that compliance, we run testing. So we actually ran quality assurance and the compliance scoring framework that we use. We ran that manually using human scorers. We then benchmark that versus the AI agent, and we're getting the same scores. So they're literally coming out the same. But we monitor that. We don't just take that as a one-time set and forget. We come back and we periodically test that, and you put the frameworks in place to make sure it's handling it. I think you'll always find a reason not to do something, and change can be pretty scary, especially when you start to say the types of change, because they're seismic shifts, and from having manual teams doing it to agentic teams. The way I'd think about it is we don't let employees in our business just run off and do stuff without checking, monitoring, reviewing, giving feedback. And you do the same in an agentic framework. So you can actually build in feedback loops where you say, if you've ever seen ChatGPT thumbs up, thumbs down on the prompt, that's reinforcement learning. You're saying to the AI, that was a good response, that was a bad response, just like we do with a human. I think in an agentic framework, you want to have the same types of feedback loop where you go, hey, that answer is not acceptable. I want to retrain you on the following answer. And I think that's an important part of managing these transitions.
Yeah, and even the instruction, when you hit this point, check with me.
Correct.
Like don't proceed until I've looked at that response, because otherwise they can just disappear off into their own kind of thought loops a little bit. That
Absolutely. I mean, there's, we'll always hear about the scary ones. I saw one earlier this week that literally was covering up its own mistakes. So it was creating data and they'd let it run off the rails. I think, as you say, Steve, if you're exposing, and I always think of it this way: if it's an internal process and there's low risk, then I'm happy to let that just run, right?
yeah,
So if I do the copywriting and I get to the end of the copy and I still do a manual check and I go, oh, it's no good, I want to redo it, there's no harm. If you're integrating into a core process or exposing it to a customer, you probably want to put some steps in there just to check beforehand,
yep,
or put a lot of effort in with your data science team to make sure you've done, red hatting, you've got all the frameworks, you've done the safety protocols, privacy. There's some things you can do depending on the level of risk, and I think each company is going to have to assess that risk. But if you do it, would you let a first year grad do this without any supervision? Then maybe you shouldn't deploy an AI agent, without any human checks in the middle of it.
yeah. There are some known stories in the vibe coding world where the architect agent decides that the best way to clear the bugs it was running into is just delete the whole delete the whole code base, which makes perfect logical sense, right? That's how you clear up the bugs, is you get rid of the code. Final question, because I think it's an interesting one, is you touched on Reece, and that was a very transparent discussion. But more generally, do your clients always know when AI is involved, and how important is that transparency in that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. We've taken a position that we let them know. So in fact, we say, I think I touched on it earlier, where if we're using the AI agentic copywriting bot, we actually say, right, in our retainer models, we go to the clients and we say, hey, the new retainer will be 2 pages of human copywriting and 3 pages of copybot.
Yeah,
And we tell them that it's AI, and we do that up front. And that most of the feedback we've had, because we've been really transparent with our clients, is they're very happy with it because they're getting more output for not much more cost. So
yep,
from their perspective, they're like, okay, that's a good deal. Like, I think if you, I wouldn't overplay it either, because every single agency around the world is using AI tools within all the platforms, but to do the ad publishing, Google, you're
yeah,
essentially using lookalike audiences and ad targeting is a AI. We're not saying to clients, oh well, geez, I'm going to charge you less because Google's done some of the work in the way we've done ad targeting. So you've got to make a judgment call. But I think if it's a core process like that, or you're making a change, just be transparent. And I think if it's, for client, because some clients, and we've seen some where their board's taken positions where anything with AI needs to go through a governance or a board review process.
yep,
So again, you don't want to find yourself on the wrong side of a conversation to say, oh, sorry, we've pushed this through to you, and we didn't have the conversation. So I think transparency in this is key. It often helps then teams, to the conversation we had earlier around how do the teams adjust to it? How do you start to remove that fear? People can review it, and what we're finding, and I guess this is the wonderful thing with language models, the more people that have used them, the more people start to go, oh, I could use it for this or this or this. So showing those outcomes normalizes it and takes away the fear, as opposed to the bots are coming for my job.
yeah, certainly. And I think the same as with people security. You have to think about how secure the data is. You have to think about the things that can break, and this, as you touched on, is all about process. We're going to wrap up here. I'm conscious we've gone kind of 10 minutes over time. Scott, thank you very much. It was a really interesting conversation, something I'm super excited by. I learned a lot from you today. For the rest of us, when we exit, or when you exit the webinar, a short survey will pop up. Take a minute or two. We'd love your feedback. We are a feedback tool after all, so we use it to get better. If you want to know more about us or Scott, we'll send out some, you'll have the opportunity to get contact details afterwards. Thank you all once again. Have a great rest of the evening for most of you, I guess. Early morning for us. And Scott, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Stephen. We'll speak soon. Cheers.